What is going on, guys? Welcome to the Wednesday night live stream. I have Jim and Luke on tonight. How you guys doing?
Good. What's up, Davin?
Not
Hello,
too
Devin.
much. Hello, hello. So today we are talking about Kalkapalooza and the many wonderful things related to Kalkwasser, and some conventional and not so conventional ways of dosing and using it, which is going to be some of the fun stuff I think we're going to get into today. So Jim, I saw on your stream the two of you guys were talking about this, which kind of sparked my interest.
Yep.
Probably a few weeks ago, because about a month or two ago, I had this big conversation with somebody. I saw you guys are already dabbling. I was like, perfect. This is a great rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah, super cool to talk about this. It's an interesting topic. I mean, it's not just basic calc, although basic calc I think is awesome. This takes it a little bit further. With Luca's help, he made that happen.
Excellent. So, I guess first thing, just for people that haven't used calc before, so Kalkwasser, calcium hydroxide. It is basically, a lot of people uses a very simple method of dosing because you got one powder. You can either, some people just premix it in a jug and drip it in, or if you want to get it fancier, you can get a calc reactor, which is basically a device you feed your auto top off through, or use a dosing pump to feed water through it. So it basically keeps it continually saturated, and you just top it off every 3 or 4 weeks. That's another method of doing it, and that's currently what I'm doing. And I'm modifying this a little bit to get closer to what you guys are doing. But we'll go down there. Now, one other thing. Earlier, you were talking about baking calc. I've never actually baked it, so fill me in on this one.
That's all you, Luca.
Yeah.
I've never baked calc myself, but
Okay.
if you want, you can drive off the last bit of moisture and make it super dry. Technically, it'd have a longer shelf life.
Okay.
My wife doesn't let me do that.
No baking in the oven.
No, you gotta bake LEDs in the oven, brother.
That's no go. She let me passivate the metal though. That's pretty happy.
Wait.
All right, that's cool.
Is that your way of doing SMDs in the oven?
Yeah, I do them in the oven.
Do you? Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That's cool. I used
That's
to
how
have.
they do it. That's how they do it in China. It's a big oven.
Yeah, that's fair. There's actually, I don't know if you guys actually ever watched it, but complete sidebar. But I went to Ecotech's factory where they were building it all, like actually at their main place, and watching the SMD machines build everything was super cool.
Those machines were amazing, right? They were super fast. They were really doing a nice job. I just stood there and watched them for a while. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I was so amazed watching this little robot arm, like high speed, place all the components before it gets baked in the circuit pizza oven.
Just pulls them off that. It's like those little candies coming off those little papers that you used to get as a kid. It was just like that, pulling all the components off.
No, yeah, super duper cool. All right, so Kalkwasser, basically you're getting your alk and your calcium all in one solution, drip it to your tank. I got the little bright one in the corner. That one also has magnesium and strontium in it, so you can get a little more bang for your buck, kind of as an all-in-one if you go that way. So the bazillion different brands of stuff out there. Most of them I've used, the fancy ones. I've used industrial grade. A lot of it comes down to purity. I know some of the cheaper ones I've had like weird little things stuck to my magnetic stir, so I don't know what those impurities are, but that's kind of the biggest.
Oh, that's interesting. Were they magnetic then?
Yeah, some of them were. So,
oh, wow.
But that was like bulk industrial. That was like my ghetto calc that I used to use. That was
Got it.
industrial grade. But yeah, it always kind of creeped me out a bit. I'm like, why is there little things stuck to my stir bar that are magnetic? Let's go into my tank.
At least, I mean, it's like a magnetic drain plug on your car, right? It's catching all the nasties.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one benefit.
What's interesting is that when you dive into it, there's different scales for everything. So a lot of people at home might have 150 gallons total max. When you go bigger and bigger and you have more uptake, the less you worry about impurities.
Yeah.
So I called up my some friends that make it commercially, that's the food grade stuff, and I found the impurities are generally okay. Actually, you would consider them micro elements or trace elements. However, when you're in a smaller tank, I would definitely recommend people going to the cleanest stuff you can absolutely get.
Yeah.
It's really important.
Another side thing I think too is if you are in the water change camp, you can get away with a little bit more, but if you don't do water changes, over time those impurities will build up, and then that could explain some like the weirdness that happens in tanks where something dies, lost coral, what happened, nobody knows, right? But it could be those impurities building up over time. That's my theory with a lot of the people that are anti-water change, is eventually they'll run into issues because they're not diluting any of those pollutants that you don't know about.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, from a chemistry side, no water changes. I understand it, but it just it's too much for me to fathom as I'm in manufacturing of chemicals. I used to be.
Yeah.
Those magnetic pieces, Devin, they're probably parts of the metal in the process falling off, and they don't have their
Probably.
magnets up to speed, and they're getting through because it's not food
Mhm.
grade. So,
Yep.
yeah,
There
And
you
it's
go.
not stainless if it's grabbing a hold of the pill.
Yep. I know. But yeah, no, that always amazes me. That's like how I like gauge calc products is how much crap stuck to my magnetic stir bar after a couple months.
Yep. Interesting.
Yeah. So random side bit. All right. So now with dosing calc slurry. Now this is kind of the interesting bits for me. So most people that's always been told don't dose the slurry, only dose the clear liquid above it.
Yep.
Where we're basically doing the exact opposite here. We are dosing the cloud of all the calc fully saturated. Now, high level, you're basically using your tank as a giant reactor
Totally.
to absorb it, right?
yeah, yeah. So when we're talking about Jim and I call it calc milk. I'm from
Yep.
Wisconsin, so it's kind of stereotypical, but if you look at it, I mean, Jim, it looks like milk.
Oh, it totally does.
Yeah, it
It
does.
doesn't taste like milk.
Don't
And we'll,
taste
we'll
it.
get
Wait,
on
wait,
to
wait,
safety.
wait. Did you actually try it?
No,
It's
no.
caustic.
But what this is you have a saturated solution with unreacted particles of calcium hydroxide going around. So if you follow Jim or my Instagram, we talk about obsessively sealing every little nooks and cranny because we want to limit. If you limit the carbon dioxide going in, you're not going to have a lot of reactions that are going to use up that calc. So you can stir it up as long as you don't have an open top or air blowing on it. And so if you can imagine, a slurry is basically a solids are suspended. So my biggest gripe with calcium hydroxide is that the solubility is only 1.73 grams per liter at 70 degrees, and it's inversely soluble. So the warmer it gets, the more it goes down. This stuff's really a bad behaving chemical. And Jim, you know how much, it's a naughty chemical on my list. It's a naughty one.
Yep.
It ruins things.
Yeah.
So it's too much limitations, Devin. You can't get enough alk for anyone that has sticks and lots of them. No matter how it's the volume, if you have a lot of sticks in a given volume, you can't get enough alkalinity. And then a lot of us live in climates that are actually very dry in the winter, but very humid in the summer. And so that goes to Jim's whole thing about you can't use it for auto top off because you'd have this like varying rate. So this is a way you take evaporation out of the equation. You use science and not myth on how to do it. And we can get into that later. It's totally doable. But if you don't do it right, it's going to fail. So that's the big caveat. So when I go to people's tanks, and Jim, I'll let you chime in here. A lot of times when we go to people's tanks, you're like, okay, that's set up wrong. That's set up wrong. You do that wrong with this, and you're going to brick out. You will literally make like balls of calcium carbonate that will precip out.
So there was
actually Bert just mentioned that because he asked about solidification in the tank. And one thing that Luca kept pushing was ensure that wherever you're dripping the slurry, because you could drip it in multiple locations. He and I are doing it in different places and in our respective systems. But as long as you're dripping in a high flow area, it won't solidify. So it goes into solution. And like Devin, you said, it turns your tank, that high flow area, that water volume into the reactor.
Yep. So I have a power head where I'm dosing my calc in that last chamber of the sump right before my return pump. Do you guys do the similar thing?
Yeah.
So
I have a big power head because I'm OCD about this not failing. I will not let this idea fail. But Jim, I think your application is the best. And when I upgrade my system, I'm going to copy you. So why don't you talk about that? It's easily the best way to do it.
We're talking about where I'm dosing?
Absolutely.
Oh, I dose directly into the overflow. So it goes right down the down tube into the sump. It's churned up quite a bit. It instantly mixes.
That's actually a good way to do it too.
It looks funky because I have it rigged up right now. It is absolutely not production ready, but it's there. It hasn't fallen off. That's cool, and it continues to drip into that overflow. But that works pretty well.
Nice. I guess another question, what kind of a drip rate or how many mils per minute or whatever are you dosing into your tank right now?
So I think this is where it gets really fun. So Jim courageously accepted the offer to try this out on his tank. He wanted to do it. I didn't have to convince him, but he is a small volume.
Yep.
So his solution blew my mind. It was so innovative and it works. I have over 700 gallons. So this 250 is just a little part of my system and it's all connected. So I'm literally dripping 4 gallons of slurry a day, which is equivalent of like, I think 110 gallons of Kalkwasser, saturated Kalkwasser. It's something ridiculous. So why don't you talk about how you do it, Jim? Because that's more applicable to people listening on this show.
Yeah, mine's smaller volume. Total system volume is somewhere between 90 and 100. And I am dosing, using the doser that I have, I dose every 10 minutes. So 144 times a day, I dose just a little bit. And that gets me somewhere between 600 and 800 mils, depending upon how the tank is doing at any given time. Right now, I have it fixed right around 600 mils just to see how the tank handles that fixed dose. Generally, I do a variable dose with a GHL controller, so it controls to a specific alkalinity. Right now, I have a fixed dose because I want to see night and day changes as the pH changes. I want to see that uptake.
So just because I'm curious now. Okay, so I'm doing about 5 liters a day on my tank through the calc reactor currently.
Yeah.
So 3.2 mils a minute is what I have mine set up. Now,
divide that by 24 for my case.
Yeah. Whatever that works out to.
Yeah, because I'm 24 times saturated.
Okay.
And I think, Luca, we're actually doing different saturations too, or different concentrations, right? You're lower than me. I can't remember.
Yeah, I went. The doctor told me my cholesterol is getting a little high, so I'm on skim milk right now. So for the combers, they say they can dose from 0 to 120. But if any of you work in a lab, you're like, let's see the low end. It's disastrous. So I actually cut mine with a lot more water now. So I'm at 2.5% by weight, and I'm able to get more into the band where it actually is more accurate, and it's working. It's working really nice for me.
So, interesting question in the chat. A couple people ask about adding the powder directly to the tank. Now, that's not something I've ever done.
Can I take that one?
You sure can.
Yeah, all you.
All right. So to back up, one thing that's really important is why do I like the way Jim doses his calc slurry? You allow the longest contact time before it goes back into your tank, and the kinetics of calcium hydroxide are not instant. So I'm super jealous of his setup. That's the way to do it. So I just want to go over the reason why I like it so much is because it's basically, if you look at your pipes going down like that, it's literally a reactor, and I don't like you. It's just it enhances the kinetics.
It's a blender.
And mass transfer. Exactly, and the mass just diffuses and gets in there. So your question was to put dry powder in. Okay, so I actually was going to do this first because I thought it'd be the easiest way to do it. So calcium hydroxide is really bad in solution. Calcium hydroxide is really bad out of solution. In fact, companies like Mississippi Lime.
Yeah.
If you're watching, I feel for you guys. I don't know how you keep that plant running. It is probably the most horrific conditions. Anyways, these little microdosers, I was looking into them and I was talking to companies and stuff, and $4,000. Oh, you need the vibration kit because it bridges really bad. So bridging is a term in the industry where it will actually structurally make a tunnel and just sit there just to infuriate you because calcium hydroxide is so terrible.
Yeah.
So I gave up on it. Honestly, if I ever started farming at the 50,000 gallon level, I think it's very doable. But other than that, no. And you need such agitation. I think the energy requirements would actually make it prohibitive. And I think I would like to get a professional slurry suspension agitator tank. It would work really well, and I don't think you'd ever need that dry addition like that. But it's a good question.
as pre-agitated in a slurry, to me, it's more soluble once you add it to that bigger volume. Where as a powder, I think most people would just clog up your socks, and I don't know if it would dissolve enough to get the benefit. That's my thought without trying it, just off the top of my head. And like someone in the chat was asking, oh, but doing through a fish feeder, and another buddy was talking about building a little auger system to slowly dose it. But yeah, I think it would just clog up your socks, and personally.
Well, going back to it's the worst chemical in the world besides what it does for your tank. It doesn't even, it just sits on, it's like hydrophobic for a while. It just sits on the water level. I mean, it's just such a bizarre chemical. So if it behaved more like sodium chloride, you could totally do that and it would be so easy, but it's definitely not.
Yeah, but magic for your pH and your corals.
Ooh, for the pH.
Yes. Okay, so pH, I think, is the main reason that we all go down these rabbit holes, is trying to find that magical higher pH to increase coral growth.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
Oh, okay. On there, I was just going to say, how much of a difference have you found dosing the slurry affecting pH versus just a standard issue calc reactor dripping or feeding it through your ETO?
Go ahead, Luca. I'll go after you.
Okay. So I'm obsessed with my pH, and I want to thank you, Devin, because when you had Chris on, I was listening to your show. I wasn't watching it because I was driving, and I watched it twice. I was so obsessed with it, and it gave me finally the courage to make my slurry system.
Nice. Awesome.
So thank you, and thank you, Chris. And I'm sure he's really annoyed because I ping him in everything I post, but he's a good guy. So when I was on no calc and just a carbonic acid generator, a calcium reactor, did I misspeak? That was pretty cheap. But when I was on calcium reactor, I was under the belief calcium reactors are the best because they're trace elements and et cetera, et cetera. I dissolved a bunch of coral skeleton and sent it in for ICP, and it doesn't have really that much trace besides strontium, boron. Jim, help me out with the other ones. That's about it.
You could go down the list of the micro elements, and there's very, very little.
It's not much.
I mean, it's one of those things that's always touted, right? When you talk about a reactor, when you talk about a calcium reactor, but nobody shows you that data.
Yeah,
Lucas got that data.
I did not as direct as yours, but on probably 3 tanks ago, I did a similar test where I didn't dose anything for like 3 months when I set up the new tank and only used the calcium reactor, and then I did an ICP to see what I was low on to kind of figure out what is lacking.
Nice.
Roundabout way. I'll have to dig that up one of these days, but I bet you it's pretty darn similar to what yours is showing.
So to stay focused on that, I have ADHD, so I apologize. With calcium reactor only, I have an HRV because I care about my family's air quality. Really is why I have it. But my CO2 is very low. I have direct air from the outside, and I would hit a peak of 8.3 for a little bit, and it would go down to 7.9. When I went into Kalkwasser, it went up to about an average of about 8.15. And before my pump destructed in version 1 of my calc slurry reactor, I was averaging, Jim, I was posting that stuff. I think it was like 8.45.
Yes.
I think it was. Yeah. So if you look on the logarithmic scale, the amount of hydrogen ions, which is what causes acidity, was like 6 times less or something like that. So I could say that my tanks are 6 times less acidic in terms of concentration. So it was huge for me. And then when my system decided to detonate, it went back to the exact same levels.
When you say system detonated, that was your dosing contraption.
My contraption of a wave maker that I think your J-Bow might be the strongest wave maker in the world. See? Because mine lasted 10 days.
You got to pick the right wave maker.
Now, did it die because it's getting sandblasted from being in a bucket of calc, or did it die from buildup, or what's the main?
You have a lot of good questions. So it was the violent death. So I talked about the inverse solubility of calcium hydroxide in water.
Yeah.
So where that rotor goes in that little hole, they have little vent lines that bring water through it, but that cannot stop the terror that the calcium hydroxide is going to leash upon that motor. So it literally shaved off the magnets.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, some of my elements, they're finally in range because of that.
Yeah.
So it shaved them off, and then finally one day it just stopped. And I've actually had 3 versions before this. I had this calc reactor where I had this CJ pump that was circulating through, and it actually ripped off all the impeller vanes of the CJ pump.
Dang.
So that's why I went to my new system, which is external agitation, which we can talk about later.
Paddle, paint stir paddle, basically.
Mine's not nearly as
like
cool
this.
as a mustache. Not nearly as cool as that. So Jim, did you see similar results with your pH too?
My pH has gone through the roof, and I'm actually carbon dosing to limit how high the pH goes. So I hit my low is 8.2, and I could easily get to 8.7 at an alkalinity of 9. Remember, the volume's right around 100 gallons. So I do dose on the hour, 4 hours midday to knock the top off of the pH to keep that from going. Because Luke is like, that hits 8.8, all your stuff's going to blow up. I was like, cool, thank you. Nice. So I keep it right around 8.6. So I go 8.2 to 8.6 throughout the day. A low of 8.2.
Yeah, that's pretty solid.
So what's interesting, Jim, is I like your approach with carbon dosing. With all my coral load, I struggle to have anything. I could probably dump dog urine in there and it would show 0.
Yep.
I started using my calcium reactor midday.
There you go.
To drive down the pH, because I would also hit 8.6, 8.7 if I just kept dumping the milk into the system.
Now, question. Now, you're worried about getting too high. Why not just dose less per day?
You could. I mean, you can lower your alkalinity. It all comes down to your alkalinity target, right?
Okay.
So if I'm targeting 8.5, I will hit a pH of 8.6 and a half.
Okay.
8.65. So it's a safety. At first, I want it there just in case something happens, because I could hit the phone and I could dump some vinegar in there or vodka or whatever I'm dosing at the time for carbon and the acid and knock it back down.
Yeah.
So on my side, Devin, I have run this at 7.0, 7.5, 8.0, 8.5, 9, 9.5, and 10. And my pH basically rages out of control because while it does, you get a higher pH at the higher alk levels. When you start bringing your pH up, even at an alk of 7.0, their corals are going they're in the psycho mode. And so you are adding so much calc, it can't help but just skyrocket your pH. And it's like the synergistic effect. And that's why, Jim, I was asking you earlier today via Instagram, are you getting crazy growth? Because at week 4, I was getting growth that people always talked about on the internet, but I was actually measuring it. And you could observe up to 1 millimeter a day. I have a tabling milli kind of thing. I don't know, it could be a castharda, whatever they're called. It was literally growing 1 millimeter a day. And so my tenuous, which is a hot topic, right? Everyone loves tenuous.
Yep.
If I were to say who responded to this most, my millipora, my tenuous, and my elegance coral, it's about the size of my dinner plate. But so I do believe you could limit pH somehow, but when and here's the other thing though, Jim, we both have ridiculously loaded tanks. We have to recognize that. So for someone that has an average tank, I don't think they're going to have the problems we have. Because if my L consumption was 30% less, I would not be hitting 8.5 even. I'd probably be at 8.46, 8.47.
And it's a super good point to mention, because you have to know your 24-hour drop in alkalinity before you start dosing anything. People ask that all the time. I was like, how do I know how much to dose? I was like, don't dose, right? Measure your system 24 hours later, take another measurement. That way you know what that 24-hour drop is. You don't have to guess. Well, it depends on what you're dosing. But in most cases, you don't have to guess.
On Calc Slurry, I don't think we have any Calc Slurry dosing calculators, so I think it's
No, you well
start
you
low
can,
and work
but
your way
so far
up.
the math hasn't worked out for me because I think
Yeah.
I'm not 100% efficient. Luca, you could probably speak to this. We haven't talked about this yet, but I was fiddling with the calculator today, and I know I'm not getting 100% efficiency out of the slurry, but I know what I can do with what I'm dosing, the pH, and maintaining that alkalinity.
Am I refilling too fast? Is this too aggressive for the show? I don't know.
It's fair game.
I only brought 2 down though, so I behaved myself. So, Jim, what's interesting is I did some stoichiometric, calculations, and I'm like, this is how much I should dose and everything like that. My alk was exploding. So Chris was talking about this. When you liberate,
the carbonic.
Yes, and I don't know the mechanisms, and I'm not going to speculate on it. I can't find any proof that carbonate surfaces will adhere to CO2 or anything like that, but what he's observing is real. So my alk went crazy, and I'm like, I'm at half my dosing rate. Like, what's happening? And it raged for some days, and it came down. But whatever's happening, there's a little magic going on because, yeah, it doesn't work out, and that's why I always say, people are like, are controllers real, or do you really need them? And you hear a lot of stuff online, even some big time people here are like, I don't have controllers. Well, let me tell you something. My alk, I use Alkatronic. I know Jim used GHL. I don't know, Devin, what do you use?
I have Alkatronic on each tank.
Yeah. So what we're talking about, those two in my mind are built to a very different standard. And if you're going to trust your system, you're going to use it. I will tell you right now, if you don't have an alk tester, do not use Calc Slurry. So I don't use the 24-hour period, Jim, because my DKH would probably drop 2, and it's just too much for me.
Yeah, I think I would be similar.
So yeah, that's what's scary about us. We're doing the same experiments on different tanks, but we have the same load. I like to just start slow. And so whatever you're using, you ease off, and the Calc Slurry, you ease in. Mm-hmm. And what's weird, Jim, I feel like after now 2 versions that have failed but are now working really well, you get to know Calc Slurry way better. So I'm way better at adjusting it. So this time I turn my calcium reactor off, I turned my slurry on, and my alk is just like zink, because you get to know your system, but you have to have that Alkatronic or GHL or whatever you choose, because if you're doing this blind, that alk, I was in a meeting, and you're doing one of these where you got your phone and you're like, oh, and my alk went from 7.5 to 10 in 25 minutes. Oof. I hit off, it came back down, and I was like, man, Chris is for real about this. And then I just sporadically dosed it, and I got home, I adjusted it down, and that was it. So it is some danger to it. This is an advanced technique. Let's just be honest.
That wasn't Calc Slurry, was it? Was that potassium hydroxide?
No. So
that was fast.
I posted about this, and I broke them down. So I did a bunch of research because Jim asked me, and the data shows that they're all super bad. I forgot my props. I just bought sleeves up to here.
Yeah.
When I work on my calc, I wear a mask for calc. In Wisconsin, we don't wear it for coronavirus because it doesn't exist here or something. But I use all my masks for calc. The safety behind it's really, really serious. So if you're to rate them, it's kind of like rating. It's kind of like being like this. All right, if you had to crash into a wall at 150, would it be safer on a motorcycle, a family sedan, or a sports car? I don't know, but you're going to die in all 3 situations. I don't think the industry really puts enough emphasis on how bad calc is if you don't know what you're doing. And I would rate it just right up there with potassium hydroxide and sodium hydroxide. If I was going to go with one, sodium hydroxide, because it can blow up, which is pretty cool. So you got to be careful with that stuff. It'll pull water from the moisture from the air, and it could get so hot it could start melting stuff and doing really crazy stuff. It won't do that. Potassium's in the middle, and then calcium's slightly below it. But compared to most things that you deal with on a day-to-day basis, it's like, hey, let's drive into a wall at 150. Which would you rather be in?
Yeah.
I'm laughing at Rob B's. It's the pine trees, because that's no lie. Because I just spent a few days in Minnesota, lots of pine trees. COVID wasn't there either. Interesting.
Oh,
absorbed by
it's
pine.
the pollen.
Devin, you have pine trees.
I do. Actually, I have one in my yard. Actually, I don't know. It's like a spruce or something. But yeah, no, there's tons of pine trees around here. As I look out the window, I'm like, oh, there's those little bristles.
So back to testing. At a minimum, right? If you're totally comfortable with dosing your tank, at a bare minimum pH. You don't do this without pH.
Yeah,
but
pH
having an auto tester certainly makes it a whole lot easier.
Yep. Okay. Now, one thing I haven't tried yet. I was debating adding either pH or likely a conductivity probe to my calc reactor so I could monitor its saturation or know when it starts to drop.
The concentration, right? You're trying to measure the concentration.
I'm thinking conductivity would probably work better because pH, I foresee the probe just getting buggered up quickly. But have either of you tried doing that route?
I think Luke could speak to this.
I might have taken some stuff from our lab one day and did some experiments, and then they might not be working anymore. So the pH probes did work
temporarily.
However, you have to calibrate them every 2 weeks because it's such an extreme environment.
Mm-hmm.
pH probes aren't really meant to just chill at 12.7 or whatever it is. With my big system, all the things in life that we all have, that's why I went away from saturated calc. I'm like, oh my God, it's not saturated, but the stupid pH probe drifted, so it still said it was saturated. With calc slurry, there's no question, because when you have literally billions of little minuscule particles going around in the water, it can't not be saturated. And once you get it to saturation, the conductivity, the TDS, the pH will not change, because remember, we are talking about potential energy in these little particles. And once you drip it into your tank, it goes, woohoo, where's some carbon dioxide to feast on?
Yeah.
Because do you know how they make calcium hydroxide? They take limestone, they burn it, and it dries off the CO2. So then what we're doing is we're just letting it re-grab that same amount of CO2. So your calc is carbon neutral.
Interesting.
In a weird way.
Huh. So they just like superheat limestone. That's how it's actually made?
Pulverize it.
Yeah.
Purify it, of course. You're going to be doing some reactions and clarifiers and whatnot. And then you're going to be just heating it to high hell.
Crazy. Good to know. I've never actually considered how it's made, so good to know. All right. So I guess if you have, your skim milk reactor going on for being mixed up, you can just safe to assume it's fully saturated. Now so you guys are doing it differently. You are mixing, your 5-10 gallons, whatever. You're doing one big batch at once, throwing in a pump or an agitator, something to keep it in suspension, and then just dosing that, right?
Yep. Luke is using a mechanical agitator driven off an old fan motor, which works super well. I dig that.
Beauty.
I'm using, and how big is that bucket? Sorry.
It's 57 liters.
Okay. Why you got to go that? Why can't you use Freedom units? So I'm using a 6-gallon. I'm using a 6-gallon bucket with the Jabo SLW10.
Yep.
About 4 inches off the bottom, which keeps that whole thing moving. So I am the super budget approach. So I'm into this for a $60 Jabo, a 6.5-gallon Pharma bucket from work. You could use a Home Depot bucket. That's just fine. And a doser that can dose, if not continuous, damn near continuous. I think that's important.
Yep.
You can't use something like a Chemour X1. I don't know about the Pro. I don't know how many. If the Pro's only doing 24 doses a day, that's not enough either. I'm doing 144 doses a day.
Can I plug a product?
What's that?
What do you got?
DHL is the only, I believe, is the only dose that you can do that long with the duty cycles, and it's going to last. I looked in the other ones. I couldn't find anyone else that could dose more than 30 or 40.
The other two, continuous duty Chemour pump has a really good one that I've used for years with calcium reactor, and now I'm using the Ecotech Versa one. Same thing, continuous duty.
Looking forward to Versa's coming back into stock this summer. I think that'll be great.
So I do use that Chemour. By the way, if you buy them on Alibaba, they're $150 instead of $300. Just saying, and they'll give you free shipping if you ask them. Just saying. Tell Jamie I say hi. But
yeah.
you know, Devin, you have a good point. Like, I want to get my hands on a Versa, but I'm like, I could get my hands on crack easier than. That's not even a good example.
I heard rumors are actually starting to scale back up in production. Every week
They're
there should be more and more
busy.
shipping out.
They've been busy moving.
Yeah, they moved. Less employees, coronavirus, all that jazz. But
Because
Yep.
that's probably, if I'm putting my engineering brain on, that dosing
Mhm.
pump makes me envious of how well it's built. But the Comer, I took one apart. It's actually really good.
Yeah.
It really is. I was trying to like find problems with it. I'm like, so I bought 5 of them. I'm using it for everything. But yeah, you got to use something, and a lot of them you can't get away with 24 doses a day, because then what you're going to do, Jim, you know what I'm talking about. You're going to localize pH rage, which is you're going to drop all your magnesium and calcium out of solution, and then you're going to be on the internet saying these 2 guys are not accurate. They're full of crap. They're lying. They must work for Mississippi Lime, because
I'm not
didn't
even
work for
using
me.
Mississippi Lime yet.
I need to send you some. It's great stuff.
I want a pallet dropped off in my front yard.
That's the thing, is you have to understand that the localized pH, when you're dripping that in, if it gets above, please don't quote me, I think it's 9.4, you're going to get instant calcium and magnesium precipitation. Do you know what that does to your system if you drop magnesium and calcium and increase your alkalinity? We were talking about worst case scenario. You remember when like ATOs would go crazy and they dump a bunch of calc in and it turned white?
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens. And so I always tell people, you want to measure the pH where you're adding it. So in my sump, I have a cutoff at 8.6. Like Jim was talking about, you have to have a cutoff. However, my pH in my tanks only get to 8.5 because it's the localized pH that I care about, Devin. You cannot let that get to 8.8. It will do really bad things. Again, calcium hydroxide is the worst thing ever, except if you do it perfect, then it's incredible, and that's why we deal with it.
And I'd like to offer that the perfect is a pretty wide band. There's some perfect to be had there.
Yeah. So
thank you. I'm critical. I get critical.
All right. So lesson of this is, if you are going to try dosing the all fully saturated milky solution, continuous duty pump. So you're doing tiny continuous micro doses rather than, your JBO pump that can only dose on the hour or whatever, right? So,
or you go GHL, because honestly, I'm super jealous of your KH Director integrated with your dosing pumps. Are you kidding me? That is, you can do it with Alcatronic, with the Dosatronic.
Yeah.
But holy cow, that is a full package right there. But however, my Alcatronic, and Devin, you know that little spare pump for the alkalinity adjustment?
Yeah.
That little guy? Guess what? When you're dosing concentrated calc, that could work, but I'm too scared, because if it runs on, you're going to get that block, and I'm really weird about that kind of stuff, so I don't do it.
I've never actually used that little pump on it. It's still like brand new.
That's what I do with number 4 on the GHL. It's dosing the calc.
And that's why I say it's the perfect. Like, I can't think of a better setup than the KH Director and one doser, because that extra head can go 144 times a day. That is the solution for, I'm going to say, 90% of the people. Now, if you're in aquaculture and you're watching this, hit me up. There's a lot of really cool ideas once you get above where I'm at, like 700 gallons, and you get into the thousands of gallons. This becomes really exciting, because you can buy 50-pound bags of calc, which I do, and you can get a big reactor, and it'll run for a month, and it'll power your entire facility. So easy, and you can just use Masterflex big peristaltics and be done with it. So this is scalable from someone that has, I would say, gym setup is probably ideal. A little bit lower, you could do it if you're really, experienced aquarist, all the way up to as many gallons as you could possibly fathom. This will work.
Yeah. Now, I know, like, if you have a pump inside of calc, like, I know that generally gets beat up and requires lots of maintenance. From just feeding, because since you guys have a big thing you mixed and you're sucking out, does that have any buildup or any issues inside the tubing inside of there? Because I've always used it the opposite, where I'm only pushing RODI in, so none of my equipment deals with the nasty, right?
But you still have a pump coming out of your reactor that
No,
could potentially clog because you're pushing Rhodey in, right?
well, I push
gravity.
Yeah, it's gravity out. I push RDI in, and then it just teeters it off that little fitting out into the tank, and then drips out.
I mean, you still have tension inside that tubing, right? So you do have a buildup. It's not draining completely. I don't have that problem because I think it comes down to continuous dosing or as close to continuous as possible. As long as you're moving that fluid, and that's a homogeneous fluid inside that tube all the way. It's not dropping out of solution. It just keeps, it stays the way it stays.
Yeah, just curious long term. Okay.
So what I noticed is if anyone goes to this method, you get a power outage. So Jim, I had a 7.5 hour power outage. I had my generator all ready because of your inspiration. So we were good, but my calc doser was off. My slurry was off. And actually in that time, it started solidifying in the end.
Yeah.
So I would just say it doesn't, Devin, shockingly, it doesn't build up. The tubing inside the pump, I don't know what you call that, like the little, little piece of tubing like the roller tip.
The head tubing.
It seems like it lasts for, it's good. I took one and cut it in half and looked at it. It's not even worn. I mean, like, okay, here we go. So other than if you turn it off for a long period of time, you need to get a nail or something and just poke open your hole. And also, big bore tubing is bad. The smallest tubing you can get, 1/8 inch, good, because your velocity stays up. And to Jim's point, then it just shoots out, and you don't get any settling and entrainment issues.
You could also keep the tip just under the water surface, so it sees more agitation and it won't solidify on the end.
Yeah,
well, that works.
Yes,
I just clean mine once a month. Every 4 to 6 weeks, just rinse some water through it, and it's all good again.
Right. If it's just under the tip a little bit, it stays pretty clean.
Okay, I was actually wondering. I've debated putting mine underwater, so
as long as the water's moving, you're fine.
Yeah. All right. So how much agitation do you have in the chambers of your sump, or you're going down your overflow? Yep. You have a hardcore pump in yours, Luca.
Yep, a big Toonsy, big, not huge, but it's for a 40 on my sump for my system. Okay, when I built this system, it was just for the 250. I have a 40-gallon sump for my entire 700-gallon system. I have 2 Toonsies, I think, that push 2,000 GPM, and they fight each other.
So you got tons.
And then in the eddy vortices, it goes into the protein skimmer. I read a lot of. I'm not going to call them studies, clinical studies, but a lot of evidence that dosing the calcium hydroxide into the intake of the skimmer increases the skimmer's efficiency. I have no way to test it. I have no way to prove it, but my skimmer has really, quote unquote, upped its game. It's like darker and more disgusting. My kids hate the smell. Now they almost puke when they smell it. So it's doing something.
Interesting. I've never heard that one. On a completely random note, I read this somewhere, and I think I tried a little bit, but the jury's still out. But they said if you put a little bit of calc powder inside your skimmer cup, it reduces the odors.
That's interesting.
I know. I tried it, and I haven't quite decided if it's a big difference or not, but something to experiment with.
Hey, Luca, Battle OCR jumped in, and he mentioned that you have a 700-gallon. And how much are you dosing, and can you estimate your alkalinity? I think you said 2 DKH drop over 24 hours. How much calc are you dosing?
I'm dosing 14,500 mils a day.
Okay.
I'm just gonna, and if I take that by weight percent, I am dosing 400 grams. I am growing 400 grams of coral skeleton per day. So that's my grammage rate, if you will.
Grammage rate.
Serious, bro. Grammage rate.
Yeah. Nice. I like it. So, but also keep in mind that's generally, that's skim milk saturated, skim milk concentrate, slurry, not necessarily 2%. So there's variability in how you mix up. I'm mixing one cup of dry calc per gallon. So instead of 2 teaspoons, like saturated, I'm doing 1 cup.
Okay, I think I'm doing a cup and a half for 3 gallons, roughly.
Yeah, but it's It's a
I'm also
reactor.
diluting
It
it
is a
as I do
reactor,
it.
So
Yeah.
it's a different method, right?
It is.
Well,
So
not
you
for
should-
long though.
Well, true, but maybe not for long.
Yeah.
But
Well,
you're dosing just slightly above 2 teaspoons per gallon.
so what I'm starting to do, mind you, I'm just starting to dabble with this, so the jury's still out, and we'll see how well it works. But currently, I have it mixing every 4 hours, which I'm going to change to every 20 or 30 minutes, so it stays fairly milky, and kind of see how that affects it. Maybe I'll up it over time, but I'm going to try that approach. And I like the magnetic stir approach because then you don't really have any pumps to die or equipment to break. I mean, or the mixer paddle mixer on top. I think that's the other second best way to do it. But
Yeah, I think paddle mixer is absolutely the best. I mean, you run the risk of driving your pill in sandpaper all day long. Well, you're 20 minutes. Every 20 minutes, you're sandpapering your pill.
but if you run for 1 minute, but not
Yep.
be
For
too
1
bad.
minute, not bad. Devin, I was thinking actually, so I've had 4 failures to get to this point, and I want to tell everyone on here, if you want to really push the boundaries, you're going to fail, and just, it's okay. Like, I'm not afraid of my failures. In fact, they really fueled my latest version. So back in the day, I had a calc reactor traditional, but it was sized for my 700-gallon system. So I took a pharmaceutical barrel. I had a pump circulating down low with like this PVC injection system. And I just couldn't keep up with ALK. My calcium reactor was maxed out. So I drilled a hole that shot, this is how it really started. I drilled a hole in it that shot some of the slurry, so to speak, up like you're about to do.
Yeah.
It worked awesome. And that's what said, okay, hey, honey, I'm going to spend a bunch of money on stuff that's going to probably start on fire and get destroyed, but I'm going to get calc slurry eventually.
And I think, Devin, you're probably going to be. I think when you start doing it, you'll see the difference, and it'll be successful. I think it'll be a successful method. I think ultimately it comes down to the difference between spending the money on a legitimate calc reactor / stir / blender versus the budget way that I always try to go.
I mean,
in these particular projects.
It's not hard to do the budget way either, right? Because I mean,
it works.
Go buy the little magnetic mixer off Amazon for $30 and throw it on a container, and you're done. But
it comes down to the container. A cylinder is ideal. That's why I think your solution is. I mean, it's small too, right? Yours doesn't take up a whole lot of space, and it's more elegant certainly than my ghetto bucket in my closet. But
they both work. It's just pretty or cheap. Pick your pick.
And Devin,
yeah.
I have an Intel Lab mixer. I make my own trace elements, which we could have another session about that because it's working and it's really cheap and it's exciting. But I left my Intel Lab running for 3 weeks straight.
Dude, mine. I have 3 that I don't turn off. They're constantly mixing for years.
And they're like $30. They're cheap.
Amazing.
Yeah, they're awesome mixers.
So I love your idea, Devin. It's a cool hybrid that will totally work. Again, you have to have an alkalinity system to test it, though.
Yeah, exactly. Now, basically, because with yours, now you have very big jugs, so they last a while, right? Mine's 3 gallons, and I'm more like the lazy reefer standpoint, where I only want to have to refill it once a month. So that's why I like feeding it from the ATO. So it's going to be slightly diluted as time go, but if you throw enough calc in there, as long as the stir bar can handle it, it's just going to keep it fully saturated. So I think that's what I'm going to do. And if it does work well, I might convert the second chamber of my calcium reactor into like a DIY kind of one for the big tank. But we'll try that.
Especially that second reactor, because it's going to have less solids, and it might really last a long time. The Jabo, okay, if this survives, I'm seriously going to get Jabo tatted on my shoulder. Because
you heard it here.
Wait, how long does it have to live for before you get this Jabo tat?
SOW10. Boom. But, and Jim, what's cool is I finally calculated the cost for my fan agitation system, assuming a free bucket.
Mm-hmm.
And it was $75. So this thing about that, we can scale this from 100 gallons to my system could do 3,000 gallons because you just increase the weight percent. Mm-hmm. We're talking $100 and some time and some fabrication. That's it.
Yep. Oh, random thought I just had, because you're talking about the stir bar and potentially wearing through the container eventually. One of the things I did like way back when I had my like ghetto one that I built is I used just something from the craft store, like a little circle of glass, like a little disc, put that on the bottom, so that way that's rubbing on the server bar rather than going on the acrylic or plastic. Super cheap.
Yeah, that
Craft
makes sense.
store, couple bucks,
Yep.
done.
This is why we talk about things. You
Great
just
idea.
blew my mind. I mean, that is such a good idea. These are things that could cause innovation, and this is why there's my little shameless plug on forums. If we could get away from regurgitating what people have told you and just explore it yourself, that's what we need, because I'm getting more out of this. I posted, Jim, I know I told you I posted this on the forum.
Yep, you told
And
me.
people were basically like, you shouldn't be allowed to take care of your kids, and I'm reporting you to all sorts of agencies. This is what we need, is positivity and open thinking. So that's my shameless plug. Positivity in forums, not negativity. And think about actually questioning what you've been told, because when I took my little hydrochloric dripper dropper and I dissolved the media from my calcium reactor and it came back with no traces besides a couple, that changed. These things are real. You can do this. This is data. $27 or $45 for ICP test.
Yep, exactly. But yeah, no, I always question everything, because
Agreed.
whoever's telling you something, they're probably not wrong. But there is a bazillion ways to accomplish similar things, right? In some
Agreed.
ways work better than other, but usually if they say something worked for them, it probably did. Will it work in your tank? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But
And it won't.
it goes to show there's a million ways, and if you merge these ideas together, sometimes you come up with really kind of cool hybrid new approaches to things. So
And as long as you honor thermodynamics and chemistry, you're going to be good. And if you don't know it, ask Randy on Reef to Reef. That guy, I would love to do a podcast with him. We could just geek out about all sorts of weird
anything.
stuff. But he'll answer your questions. And if I'm on there, I'll answer your questions. Like, chemistry is really kind of crazy, and I don't want you guys to know it. Just ask someone. And so I'm not plugging anything, but Jim and I, we post a bunch of stuff that talks about this. I document this. I talk, and I'm going to bring it down to a level where you can understand it so you can be successful. That's really where I want to be.
Now, just quick plug for you guys as well. Both of your Instagrams are in the description below. So if you guys are not following them and want to check out all the crazy mad scientist products, make sure you hit that link and give them a follow.
Thanks, Devin.
Of course.
I have
Yeah.
horrible photos, and Jim has good photos.
Yeah, but I irritate more people.
Okay, one of the questions
Like,
in the chat: do you think there's any issues running a CO2 scrubber recirculating and calc together? Only potential issue is your pH may get too high, but no issues.
Yes. Look at Lucas's pH. He's got a low 8.35 and a high of 8.55. That's
Pretty
ideal.
solid. Yeah,
And
that's a
guess
solid
what?
range.
the scrubber media, when you go to a calc slurry, take your scrubber media off, and then that $100 a month, go buy your family a dinner every month. I want to save you money. That stuff is expensive. It's no joke. Get rid of it.
Agreed. And you could run an outside air line. For those of us that have the ability to run an outside air line, outside air and slurry totally eliminates CO2 scrubbing. It's unnecessary.
No, exactly. Well, it still helps. But outside
No,
airline,
it doesn't, because I have my outside air plugged into a CO2 scrubber and it never changes. There's no change whatsoever.
That's because you have good air exchange, brother. Some
That's
people
probably
don't,
true.
and you will see a benefit. However, if you talk to any calc milk guys that have been running this for a long time, I actually am thinking about removing my outside air from my skimmer because I need CO2 to come in so I can drive the pH down so I can keep dosing more calc throughout the day. I actually want to start, weirdly enough, adding more CO2 to my system so I can dump more calc slurry into it. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
It probably doesn't, but that's where I'm at.
Now, just on a side note, I am going to try unplugging mine for a few days and see if I notice a difference, because now I'm curious. But I saw a benefit above just outside airline by putting pre-scrubbing the air. So outside air, but I basically did it so the media will last longer, right? Because outside air is like 380 CO2-ish, right? But if you run it through there, then you're stripping it down to nothing, basically. Now, or you can do the recirculating method, which is on top of your skimmer, so it's sucking its own air and over and over and over again. Again, it can get more life out of it. Now, if you are doing the slurry and all this other stuff to boost your pH up, I mean, it's probably not going to need it. So,
Agreed.
Yep.
And today's current CO2 is actually at 430 something, and it varies. Like I mean, I don't want to plug climate change and stuff, but we're at a real scary spot. So actually, if you watch, our CO2 is just skyrocketing. So in 5 years, I might be trying to get rid of CO2 because the CO2 concentrations are actually too high now, and my pH isn't staying high enough. And I actually, okay, here's my little thing. As we get more CO2 in this environment and our houses get tighter and tighter, you almost are going to have to go to calc to keep your pH somewhat reasonable because there's going to be too much CO2 in our atmosphere.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Man,
I know
Debbie Downer.
Luke is a buzzkill.
Well,
I know.
so
Well, not really, because I just polished 2 IPAs, so I'm still buzzing hard, brother.
now with so the air exchange in your house makes a big difference too. Like if you have all your windows open, you know, you're definitely gonna see a pH boost. If a bunch of people are breathing in your house, windows are all closed because it's too hot or too cold or whatever, your pH is definitely going to suffer. Luke, I know you mentioned you had an air exchanger, which is my next project. It's like partially installed. I started to like connect my upstairs and downstairs for like the venting. It's still sitting there. I still got to install it, but I ran the air intake vent anyway, so it's baby steps.
So the hardest thing is done.
Yep.
Once you get them, your overall air quality for your family too really improves.
Yeah.
So it's one of those few things you can be like, listen, honey, I want to do this for the family.
Exactly. A little sleepy,
I only
little
get
groggy.
decent
We
air
have high
change in the
CO2.
basement in the winter because
Really?
it just falls down the chimney. There's a fireplace in the basement, and there's a ton. I'll get 50, 55 degrees in the basement on those cold days because there's so much air coming down the chimney.
Yeah.
But summertime, I don't. But I'm always pulling outside air, no matter what season.
Yeah. I bought one of those CO2 meters and realized how bad it was. Yep. And then ever since I've been on the whole boost my pH quest.
So Devin,
yeah,
did you get that?
Big...
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Did you get the idea from, I think it was Mike Paletta?
Yeah, I had him on a live stream. We were talking about it, and I'm like, which one did you get? And he told me which one it was, so I just bought the same one. And then that started this rabbit hole of obsessing about pH. I blame Mike.
How weird is it that you influenced my life so much I don't even know? This is getting kind of bizarre. So I have that thing. I have that thing. And with my HRV, I actually plumb it so it goes up top and then it comes down to the basement and comes out. I'm only 40 ppm above ambient outside.
Oh, nice. That's awesome.
That's awesome.
But really when you talk about things like when you have that meter, when you have friends over and stuff, your pH goes through the freaking roof. CO2. It's crazy how much you influence the CO2 in your house.
I don't want to know.
Yeah, it really is crazy. Like I was amazed. Just like windows open, drops way down. You close your windows, it's up like 400 points in hours. Like it's crazy how much it fluctuates. And the more CO2 in the air, as your water's agitating, everything's happening. It's being absorbed into your tank through the agitation, and that's what causes most people to have their pH tank. Yeah, especially if you're somewhere super humid and your air conditioner's on all the time, whatever, right? The windows are closed up tight because it's too hot. In the winter, they're closed up because it's cold, right? Spring and summer, they're open, they're flowing, the tank's extra happy. So it's all seasonal. So air exchanger, I think, is actually a good investment as well for the pH battle.
Yep.
I have an attic fan. I wonder if that would... I haven't worried about it. Because ignorance is bliss in this particular case. I have no idea what those numbers are, so I'm not chasing them.
Yep. Now,
as soon as you give me numbers, then I was like, oh, now I got to do something. I wonder if the attic fan would pull enough from the basement up and out.
But here's the cool thing about Kalk Slurry is, so I'm building the house. I postponed it because lumber was like more expensive than like cars and stuff. So when I finally build, I have an air exchanger for my fish room, which is going to house a whole lot of corals. But what's weird is I'm rethinking, do I need really that big HRV I was going to plan? Because when you're dosing calc milk, CO2 levels become irrelevant because you are eating that stuff up as it enters your tank. And that's why I like this. And that's why I'm pushing to talk about this so much, is because it really changes. Like, okay, do I want to drill in my house and fish through walls and get that fresh air in? Or Devin, you've done it now. You know how, you haven't done all of it. Wait till you set up all the thing and you have to air balance your house. It's a pain in the ass. So do you want to do all that? Or do you want to just drip calc milk and not
Yes,
worry
Joel.
about it anymore?
I'd still do both. But if you don't own a house, you probably want to stick with the simplest solution.
There you go.
Yep. Now, just on the sciencey part, you can probably just explain this better than I can, but generally how a lot of this works is the hydroxides in like calcium hydroxide and Kalkwasser. It basically bonds to those carbonates in the water, and I don't know if it absorbs them or pulls them out, but that's basically you're raising your pH by taking away the carbonic acid or bonding it, which basically makes more availability of pH alkalinity, if I explained that correctly.
You did a great job, and I think I've been doing this service. I've been talking about CO2 because in my mind I'm thinking carbonic acid,
Mm-hmm.
but the reality is that you are actually taking the carbonic acid out of the water because that's what's actually CO2 isn't free in your tank. It's actually carbonic acid. So when you add calc, it takes the carbonic acid out, which is basically what I call removing CO2. So you are 100% correct.
Okay. Yeah, just because kind of like a bit of a explanation of how this works for people. So, I mean, there's Kalkwasser, which is calcium hydroxide. You know, I know there's different, like there's sodium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide. But basically how these work is by removing the carbonic acid from the water, which basically raises the pH by getting rid of that carbonic acid or CO2 indirectly. So, science.
I
I'm
wish you
amateur
could figure out
science
how
hour.
to do it with sodium hydroxide.
Yeah, I know. Potassium hydroxide was amazing, but my potassium got sketchily high after a month or two.
Way
using
too
it.
high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
So-
and then you got to worry. You also sodium, same thing. Sodium hydroxide, same thing.
Yep.
So what's interesting is, sodium hydroxide starts putting sodium in your tank, and it's not
Mhm.
putting calcium, so you get an imbalance. Same with potassium hydroxide. However, and it really nerdy from an aquaculture standpoint, you need your uptake. My uptake in potassium is it's grams per day.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about it, what you really could do if you have a large aquaculture facility is you're dosing calc slurry, you're dosing your milk, but then you're actually dosing potassium hydroxide because that's probably one of the cheapest sources of potassium at a much reduced rate, but that will keep your potassium in check.
Mm-hmm.
That is really cool for the nerds that want to go overboard.
Now,
I was going to ask this. I think you're going to ask the same. Go.
Random sidebar. So I have the Mastertronic, which they also have alkalinity, but they just added potassium recently. So I keep trying to poke them and bug them to add potassium to it, so I can dabble with that in the future. Make sure my levels don't get too crazy.
I think it's great, Devin, that you're helping. Whoever owns Focatronics is a genius, and they also reef. And I'm super I'd be honored to meet that person because they're really, 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 really smart. But I think when people like you are giving them feedback and helping them, that's how we develop products. You know, they should reach out to us nerds more often because when you actually are running it, it's different than what is in a boardroom or maybe in one little test tank or something like that.
Yep. I know they both have reef tanks, which helps. I think that's a big thing, right? Like any company, when I actually see, like in their offices, in their homes, when they actually have reef tanks, it shows a lot because they're actually using the products. They understand them. They know how it works. They're like, oh, I wish it did this. And, that's something that works on it for a future product. So I think that really does go a long way.
Yeah.
That Mastertronic is pretty sweet.
It is awesome. I love not testing anymore. It's so good.
I think I'm allowed over Moki's house, so I'm gonna go see it.
Cutie.
Hey, Luca. Sorry, Devin. Can you mix potassium hydroxide and sodium hydroxide? Could you add potassium via slurry with a couple of drops of potassium hydroxide?
I believe you could physically mix them together. Now, if you could mix it with the slurry, it could be another interesting
My initial
idea.
take is I like it because, number one, potassium hydroxide is very soluble, very, very soluble.
Yeah.
Calcium hydroxide is kind of soluble. That's why we're doing our slurry thing. But there's no side reagents to cause fallout. Man, dude, that's a good idea.
You'd have to figure out how many drips, right? It would be at a drip level.
Yeah.
You would just add a couple drops.
Yeah, whatever your tank is showing you need, you'd be basically making your calc slurry. So what we do, both of us, is we make a small batch, like a 5-gallon bucket, or Jim might make a little smaller jug,
Yep.
and we're adding the weight and the liquid, and we're just dumping it into the quote unquote reactor. It's actually just a mixer.
Yep.
So theoretically, you could say, okay, I've been adding 6 grams of potassium hydroxide in with the solution. My potassium is still 20 ppm low. I'm going to go and add another gram, and then I'm going to test in 3 weeks. And my big recommendation on these things is go slow. And I know there's a million threads on why ICP sucks and all this stuff. And I'm just going to say, find me something better. So if you can't, let's stop talking about that and use it. And what ICP is good for is if you are overdosing, it's going to show it. So I don't care.
That's how I found out.
Is it 1 ppm of nickel or is it 2 ppm? I don't care. But let's say the threshold is like 10. It will show you 10, and you will know you're over. So I would do that approach. I actually I have some potassium hydroxide. I have all of it. I have sodium hydroxide, potassium. I have all this shit in the back. I'm gonna I love that, Jim, because I can stop dosing potassium chloride, which I use for my coral dips, also, and just dose that instead. Oof.
I know.
Interesting.
And so it advances. Now this is why I really want them to add it to the Mastertronic. So if I could have it testing potassium weekly, I'll be able to see those trends.
That'd be huge.
It's going up or down, and then you could tweak based on it. And
Yeah, that'd be super huge. Regarding ICP, right, the samples change in transit. So you send a sample off. The water that you sent isn't the same water that is received. I see ICP as absolutely good trending data. As long as you go to the same manufacturer every time, that's good trend data. It won't necessarily align with we have time on test sampling in pharma. So if we take a water sample, we have X number of hours to test it because we know exposure to air or exposure to something like the bacteria sitting inside your sample that you're sending off will change the chemistry of the water.
Now, I've often wondered how much it changes, right? Like I put my little thing in that vial, probably not much air in it because I cap it underwater, but it's, in the mail for 2 weeks before I get my results. So like how much does it change?
So I think we need to hit up Richard,
but
aficionado, right? Richard Back, because he has somebody doing ICPs close to him. So it would be sweet. Like if my neighbor had an ICP in the basement, I'd be there every day.
Insta sample and then test this one in 2 weeks.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll bug Richard later. That. This is good.
Yeah, because you raise a great point, because when it gets cold, certain elements want to drop out. When it gets hot, certain elements want to drop out. And I asked, I use ATI, so whatever. I use ATI and I asked them, and like, no, it's not too bad. It's not. Well, show me the data. Well, we don't have that. Okay. I appreciate you. And I know during the summer and the winter, I'm going to be dropping something out. But I will say, if you're overdosing something, it won't drop all of it out. So you'll still say, oopsies, I'm too much nickel. Oh, wait, I ground up 3 magnets in my calc slurry system. So that makes sense. But yeah, there is some Jim, like you're saying, I would love to find a lab around here that could just can you cut me a deal, and I just want to take some lifetime samples and send them to ATI so I could say, here is the reality of it. But 2 machines, 2 operators, so you really can't compare that data.
I know. So it's
also
tricky.
2 different calibrations, right? If I found a pharma provider, right, I know that thing would be calibrated. We can't say the same for hobby grade ICP.
Just out of curiosity, how often do they have to be calibrated? Or should they be?
It depends on history. So if they show a calibration history every 6 months or every month, maybe it's an every month thing. But if they have that trend of good data every month, then they can push it out to quarterly. If that holds, then you could push it out to 6 months. As long as you have good consecutive data, you can adjust that calibration. But you got to start frequent, kind of like we do with testing. Yeah. And then push that out. It's expensive to calibrate that equipment.
Probably.
It gets a little spendy.
I will say, if your package is going to Germany, and I'm not going to hate on America or anything, but if it's going to Germany, I asked them for the validation documents. I asked the 2 major ones, ATI and Triton, and they said, we're not going to give you our validation documents, and I expect them to say that. I'm like, but do you have them registered? And it says, yes. those are the only two companies I have received that response from.
Hmm.
And they showed me the cover letter with the stamps or signatures or whatever the heck they do in Germany. You know, it's very official over there.
Yeah.
So personally, if it's $10 more to send it to Germany, please do it.
Yeah, that's what I do. I've kind of settled on, I find the ATI one test a little more than some of the other ones, and I like that they'll test your RODI and stuff too. So my latest method now is because I got the 2 tanks. I'll do both, but I'll throw it in the one package and send it off, and so far so good. Because I got to pay for shipping because I'm in Canada, and the free shipping doesn't work for me because it's UPS, which we don't have. So.
So Devin, that's how I've tested all these weird theories. I'll dissolve my calcium reactor-mediated hydrochloric acid and send it to them as a RO sample. So I'm getting 2 samples, and I get wholesale pricing. So it's like $14. Why wouldn't I do it? Right?
Heck yeah.
It's super cheap.
Yep. No, it's a good way to go.
And actually, I don't want to plug ATI too much because I know, Jim, you love T5 as much as I do. That's a joke. He likes LEDs. I like T5. But if you actually call them up and talk to them about what you want to do, hey, I want to test this or whatever, they will pull that sample and they will put their people on it and they will do an awesome job. So
sweet.
I have crazy respect for ATI in that aspect. They're very professional.
That's good to know.
That is super good to know.
Some more experimentation in the future. Beauty.
My neighbor needs to buy an ICP machine. That's all there is.
But they're cheap. Yeah, you know, they're right around the corner.
That guy's Health and Human Services. You think I could just, sneak that into budget, will you?
Yeah, exactly. Just trade your car in for ICP machine. You'll be good.
Ooh, nope, not my car. Maybe Lucas' car.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get it out of here. I want the cyber truck. Okay, I want to get it.
Okay.
I have it on order.
Oh, you're all crazy. Okay, so on the actual topic, in your multiple revisions, what were we talking about again? Yeah. So you said you've had 3 or 4 revisions of the Kalk Slurry Kalkapalooza machine, and what? Just because I know a bunch of people are probably going to try and DIY and experiment this. Which solutions have not worked, and what has worked out of the different revisions?
We have 2 solutions that work. Jim has one.
Yeah.
Fan thing. So, I went with a 3-inch impeller from some online store called Mixer Direct or something like that. And I got a local 304 stainless steel shaft. And I went to Granger and I got a coupler.
Yep, coupler.
I passivated all that 304 in my oven at 150C. Like I walked through this on my IG page. I literally am spelling it out how to do it.
Yep.
I called up some fan manufacturers and said, what do I have to watch with this motor? Because a couple guys on Instagram said, hey, Luca, the motor's probably going to burn out. And he's like, even though it doesn't look like it, the fan motor's way inside the fan system. There's these currents of air that cool it.
Yep.
So I put my little PC fan on it. Yes. Mine's not that sexy, okay? It's a little cheaper. But I'm under 40 degrees C, and if you stay below 40 degrees C and don't overamp it, it's going to last a very long time. I am sold on this. However, Jim knows how to print stuff on 3D print and things like that. I really would totally dig actually if I could design an agitator, because no knock on the agitator I bought, but 8th grade Luca could have made a better one. From a hydrodynamic standpoint, so I'd love to work with you in a hydrofoil and not an impeller, because that's what we want to just slow roll this thing. And so I'd like to make a hydrofoil. And in pharma, Jim, you know all about that too. I mean, that's how your fermenters and reactors are. I think we could do this. So number one, Jim, if you guys don't know, he makes these things and gives them away from basically free. Or if you know how to print, he'll give you the file and print it. My son's printer doesn't work because I'm incompetent at it, so I'm not trying that. I'll just pay the money for his. But if we could get, I think you're gonna have to stay with a stainless steel shaft for the rigidity purposes, because you're running at RPMs over 500. But if you could get a 3D printed shaft, this thing I think would be foolproof and it would be simple.
I would.
Go ahead.
I said I'd probably just buy a shaft over printing one. but
Yeah.
316, right?
That's what I mean.
316 from Amazon was easy for me.
yeah,
Similar
they're
to
cheap
Lucas,
enough.
this is my plan B. Well, this
Mhm.
would be plan C because the MaxiJet 1200, it gave up the Ghost terribly, much the same as Lucas pump. So the MaxiJet couldn't hang, but the J-Bo so far is good to go. But
I'm wondering
I
how
have
long it will
DC
last.
What's that?
I said I wonder how long it's going to last.
It's going to last forever, Devin.
Hopefully, we'll see.
We have a competition. Will the fan concoction or the J-Bowl last longer? It's gonna be fun.
I got
don't
money
think
on the
fan's
fan.
gonna last longer. This is a little DC motor that's speed controllable. Right. This combo came from Amazon. This was also super cheap. This is Plan C. So when I lose the J-Bo, which is inevitable, I'll go this route.
Hmm. Okay, so I'm gonna go the magnetic stir route. I think stir bar is probably up there as well for the two. The pump is gonna die eventually. I don't know how long it's gonna last, but I think if someone is gonna DIY this, I think magnetic stir or stir bar is likely gonna be the best solution.
Oh yeah, it just needs to be something simple with just I don't know that disassembling the fan, although it's totally acceptable.
Yeah. Now,
Something simple that you could just speed control. You could even speed control this off of 0 to 10 from a controller.
so back in the day, I glued magnets to a PC fan and made my own ghetto magnetic stir, and it eventually bit the dust. Or, well, no, it didn't bite the dust, but it just didn't have enough juice to have as much torque, I guess, to stir it unless it was super thin.
Yep.
And so I don't know. I might try it again because I have some of these Knock 2 industrial fans, which are a lot more beefy, and they're 0.3 amps instead of 0.09 or whatever the old fans were.
You totally should.
But yeah, these are actually to cool the tank because it gets too hot some days.
Yeah.
This is what I'm building right now.
Cool.
But
That's so cool.
aside
I think
from
you
that,
should.
Yeah.
awesome. Thanks for the super chat, Rob. Quick shout out for the couple super chats, you guys. Thank you very much, John Reefer, Vermont, Tracy, Macy's Dad is Rule, Robbie. Thank you guys, much appreciated. So magnetic stir, I don't know. I'm really curious to see how it goes. The only thing we mentioned earlier, potential if you were running it 24/7, potentially would it wear through the container over a long term. Magnetic stir pills. I somehow always seem to have stuff within reach. These little PTFE coated things. They're very low friction, like they're pretty slippery, so they're actually pretty safe. I wouldn't overly worry about it, but like after a year or two, could be an issue. I've thought in my DIY one back in the day, I put like a little glass discs from like Michael's or some craft store on the bottom to separate it from my acrylic so that there was no wear there.
That's super smart.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I think, because I have, if this works well on the frag tank, I might try it on my big tank, and I might just convert my second chamber of the calcium reactor and slap a magnetic stir on the bottom.
You're using, what pill are you using? You're using an OEM pill, or you got a larger pill, if I remember right?
Yeah, so the ice cap calc stir, I had issues with spin out on it.
Okay.
Every once in a while it would spin out, and I took it apart, and the magnet that came with it was a little bit shorter than the magnet on the bottom. Now, if the magnet length are matched perfectly, there's less likely to spill out. So I replaced it with a longer magnet. It's only like 4 or 6 mils long, whatever it was, but it hasn't spun out once since I've done it. So I took a caliper and measured the distance of the magnets, and I got one to match it, and it's been perfect.
Yeah, awesome.
Yep. So that's worked really well. And then I'll probably DIY it or IntelliLab or something if I do it on the other tank, but we'll see. But I'm going to start with this one. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I don't know. So.
I'd love to take apart an IntelliLab and then just build this sweet whatever. Those things are great. We already talked about them. Bulletproof.
Yeah, they're good. I actually have one somewhere around my desk. Yeah, if you guys don't have a magnetic stir, for the 20 or 30 bucks that they are awesome, especially if you're mixing stuff like magnesium that takes ages to dissolve. You just dump it in there with a little magnetic pill and let it sit for 20 minutes, and it's all dissolved, ready to roll. So
I use it for strontium. I use it for 2 different bacterial products, because when they say shake before dose, you ain't got to do that. You just got to mix. Constant slow mixing and dosing from that container works perfectly.
Ooh, the other random pro tip. I've seemed to love these water jugs.
Yep.
So I just mix up like every 3 or 4 months, because I have calcium reactor and calc reactor, but you got to tweak it once in a while. So I just pre-mix, the gallon or whatever, and I just walk out, go bloop when I need to tweak it. So they work really well.
Awesome.
Oh, they're sweet.
That's super cool.
And they fit in my cube shelf, so it looks pretty. So, but yeah,
So
super quick tweaks.
hopefully, I've been dosing calc for, I don't know, 5+ years
Mhm.
as the foundation of all dosing. So I started with calc, and then the alkalinity consumption overwhelmed saturated calc. So then I
Yep.
started dosing 2-part. And then once I switched to slurry, I've cut off 2-part altogether, and it's just 100% slurry.
Okay. Yeah. See, I calc reactor / calcium reactor on one tank, and then just calcium reactor, and then all my dosing trace elements on the other tank. So,
Cool.
but again, I'm always fighting that pH battle because I'm dosing from a calcium reactor, which
Sure.
is dosing, CO2 rich water constantly.
Yep.
Great for refugium growth, not so great for pH.
What I keep eyeballing Luca for is create a calc slurry recipe that gives us both trace
Mhm.
and calc.
Well, on the bottom corner of the
I
screen,
can't,
there's the
play
calc plus 2, that's strontium
inorganic
and
chemistry
magnesium.
Jesus, so I can't do it. But for some, you can. You can.
Yeah,
It'd be cool to combine some of it.
you probably
Well,
could do a
Simplify
chunk.
it. What, right? One single pump that's doing
Everything.
60-70% of your dosing
do-
would be sweet.
I
Could
do
be
like
good.
it. I do
is
like
good.
it. And I think what's interesting is a lot of people are going to be doing this or considering this, or
Mhm.
maybe not a lot, maybe some people that are considering this. If you already have a calcium reactor, this is the perfect complement. If you're already doing 2-part, this is the perfect complement. No matter what you're doing, this is just going to take over the majority of your alk demand. But like I do, I turn my calc slurry off during my peak photosynthetic period, and I run my calcium reactor because I want that CO2 getting into the tank to lower my pH. Jim, you're
Mhm.
talking about using acetic acid, right, to drop the pH.
I do.
So it's real. And then that's why it's so exciting. It's just plug and play, and then you have the system. Just let it work together. Don't let it work against each other.
They kind of do complement each other, but it is kind of funny that we're talking about raising pH and lowering it in the same conversation.
You
It's
gotta,
only
have
because,
that. Gotta have that safety, right?
Yeah.
and it's only because calc slurry works so good. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the good news. Is like we got to the point after about a week each. We're like, hey, are you having this situation, man? Because I am.
Is yours looking good? Mine too.
I already mentioned it. Lucas says, watch that pH. Don't let it get up. Don't let it get to 8.8.
Now,
Nope.
another potential thought. If you have your slurry and you dose, so many grams or cups or whatever per your water volume, you could adjust how much you're dosing with the parasolic pump, or you could potentially add more Kalkwasser to it, right?
You
So
can.
to increase how many particles, I guess, are in that slurry that you're dripping into your tank.
That's a small tank prob, right? I
Yeah.
have small tank problems, and I can only dose so much liquid before I'll trip the high level sensor in the sump. So
But
for me, it would be adding more calc.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the way it used to be when I was doing saturated calc. I could only do 0.45 gallons
Yep.
before I started tripping that high level sensor. So I was
Mhm.
limited there. That's why I had to add 2-part on top of that. But with the slurry, that gives me a lot of freedom.
Yep. Now,
And I was just going to say, for me, it was such a headache because I can evaporate 22 gallons in the winter, but 8 in the summer. So every day I'm checking my high
mhm.
on my tank. Am I going to start running over and having swimming problems? And I'm just like, you know what? If I'm spending this much time worrying about this stuff, I think this slurry system actually might be easier. And so if anyone's ever packed a calcium reactor, I can do 5 months worth of calc slurry, maybe 10 months worth in the same amount of time it takes to refill your calcium reactor, or go get CO2
Mhm.
for your calcium reactor. So I look at time. I just look at time.
Yeah, that's a fair way to do it. Yeah. 8 to 9. 8.5 is my target as well, so you're right on the money, same thing as me. Luca, where do you keep your elk-ish?
I've been riding at the 9 to 925.
Okay. Any special reason, or just that's the number you like?
That's when I started getting the millimeter per day growth on a couple of my acros. So I'm just
Yep.
like, I can't get enough of this, so I'm leaving it.
No, that's fair. I just keep it smack dab in the middle of the range, and you got buffer room on either side if something's goes a bit haywire around town or whatever. That's my only logic to it, but
It's getting to the point with
solid.
the slurry that I can tell what my alkalinity is from the pH.
yeah,
Yes.
very consistent.
And I think, Devin, you have a good point. Like, because we're probably obsessed reefers, we can ride higher. Okay.
Yep.
Fair to say. I started buying generic 0.1 molar hydrochloric, so I'm testing my elk like every 2 hours because it's like free now because Alcatronic is so cheap.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no risk because all I have to do is just turn it off if it gets too high. And so for the average person, I would say shoot between the 8.5 because you have a little cushion both ways.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Smart. I'm not smart though.
You're not smart though.
I can't. I cut fans up and put them on plastic bins, and
MacGyver style. I like it.
Lightly insulated speed control knobs.
Oh, that's good. All right. So people, I know some other people are going to try this. So magnetic stir or paddle, definitely. I mean, or your short-term Jabo pump until someone gets a tattoo.
Don't do it my way.
Yeah. I mean, you could take it out and maintain it frequently, but you're still going to kill it over time.
I'm not touching that thing. I just made a deal with Bird and chat that I'm not allowed. He bet me 2 months that it'll make it 2 months.
Right.
But I'm not allowed to clean it. So there it sits.
Okay, perfect. We'll see how long this goes. I'm curious. 2 months. Yeah, 2 months is. I bet you it's going to start to slow down or get caked out. I don't know. We'll see. Be interesting.
It'll be dead.
Probably.
All right, there it is. Lucas says dead. Bert says dead. Devin says sloppy.
Yeah. We're going to be like, oh, what? Nah, you're just going to walk out there one day and be like, oh, why is my pH so low? You'll look, your Jabo's roadkill.
Hey, why does it sound like there's someone knocking on the side of my calc reactor?
No, dude, that was the MJ. The MJ did that.
Right? It's savage.
2 months, 4 hours. Very precise, Bert. Very precise. Beauty. All right, boys. I think we covered this one, but I think this is good. There's definitely a lot of good experimenting here and lots of little tweaks that we can do, and I'm excited to play more with it.
Yeah, Luca, you're awesome to introduce this to me. Thank you so much. And Devin, I'm super excited to see which direction you go, because there's, as you mentioned, there's a couple different solutions to making this work.
Exactly.
And I think I'm excited to see how you handle this. I'm
going to go with the hybrid approach just because I like to be lazy and not maintain it as much, and I don't have space for massive containers like you guys have. So I think the hybrid approach will be the happy medium. So I don't know. We'll find out. We'll have to revisit this in like a month or two, do a follow-up. I think it'll be fun.
You got to weigh your pill. Weigh your pill, will you? Before you start this. And then in 3 months, we'll weigh it again to see if it's shedding.
I'd like to say thanks to Devin for getting us on, because I think if we can dispel myths, that's my whole thing. Truth matters, right? I mean, Jim has his slogans, which are pretty rad. Mine is just truth matters. So thank you. And the team that watches ReefDudes, I mean, this is a great team. I love watching the comments. I'm gonna go through all the comments and all that stuff, because there's so many people that are passionate and they want to help each other. So I do like the environment you created with your channel, which is really cool. So thank you again for having me on.
Awesome. I appreciate you guys coming on. It's been good. And thanks for everyone who joined. Again, shout out again, John, Tracy, Marcel, Raul, Rob. Thank you guys for the super chats. And if people are experimenting with this, leave comments later with what you guys are working on or what you found. And I'm sure there's still tons to learn that we haven't thought of or experiment into. So it's the whole mentality before was, don't dose a slurry. And now we're like, dose a slurry. Come on, try it. So, I mean, it's a different avenue of reefing. It's a different mentality, but that's how we learn, is by experimenting. So, to go slow, don't do anything fast, obviously, but just slowly dabble, ease it in on top of your system. Like maybe turn on a calcium reactor, you're dosing as you start to slowly up this, but, go slow and have fun experimenting.
Very cool.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks again. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you guys coming on today.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Devin. Thanks, Luca.
And don't forget to check out their Instagrams. Links